What's up, guys? This is Billy Ward. I'm an MMA writer over at Fantasy Labs, and today we're going to be looking at how to use the optimizer and the player models for MMA contests, obviously focused on GPPs. This can be done for mass multi-entry, 150 lineups or however many you want to make. I also use it for a smaller number of lineups. I've been playing a lot of qualifiers. Those usually have about a 15 entry cap. I don't even play that many frequently, but yeah. So I'm going to take you over to the player pool to start. We're looking at the event from December 4th, which was Jose Aldo versus Rob Font in the main event. I qualified for the championship series with a win in that one using these methods. So we're just going to look at this as an example of how these tools work at their best and what they can do for you. Of course, with anything, it's just a tool. This isn't going to, just give you the opportunity to click some buttons and immediately win all the big tournaments. There's a lot of decisions you need to make within that too, but we're going to talk about some of those. So the first thing I like to do when breaking these down is I try to eliminate fighters I don't want from the player pool. There's typically 12 to 14 fights on a UFC event, and even at the lower end, if there's 24 fighters, I did some math, 24 choose 6 still gives us 75,000 combinations. That's too much even for the optimizer. We're going to give ourselves a lot better odds if we can eliminate some of the lower probability fighters from the pool. So I'm going to start through with the player pool as I had it that day. First one was Zumagulov versus Manuel Cape. He's projecting fairly poorly here, so that's not one I was big on. I thought Cape was near a lock to win this, and if Zumagulov was able to win, it'd be a pretty slow, boring, kind of split decision-y thing. That can still pay off in an extremely low salary, but like I said, we need to take some stances here. Occasionally these guys are going to win, and on those events, we're just not going to win the tournament if you pick wrong. That's something we have to live with. You're not going to win GPPs every week, so we have to take our stand somewhere. Before we go any further, I did want to say this is obviously intended for MMA fans who aren't as familiar with the DFS product, but you can use our projections even if you're not as well versed in the sport and have a reasonable shot at making some good lineups here. So moving on, Jared Vanderaa was someone I was actually very high on, but his fight was canceled, so remove him from the player pool. Jeremiah Wells, same thing. We're going to talk a little bit more at length about him later, but that fight was canceled at the last minute, so he's removed. And then Mallory Martin fighting Cheyenne Buys, who's now Cheyenne Vilsmus. But I didn't think Martin had a reasonable shot at finishing this fight. While she could win it, she didn't really have enough work rate to put out a good fantasy score even with a win. Buys was a heavy favorite. All of these cheaper fighters are going to be pretty big underdogs. But this was one that I was comfortable passing on. The finish rate in female fights is already lower, and Martin didn't strike me as someone who had a good shot at doing that. Buys' striking is a lot better. There's a lot of reasons. I would have been fine leaving her in there. She probably wouldn't have shown up in the optimizer anyway because of her projections. You can see even some of the people with similar median projections to her have way higher ceilings, namely Wells and Hill. So those are the people we're going to target at the cheap end because we still need that ceiling to have a shot at taking down tournaments. Now, coming to the top, Brendan Allen versus Chris Curtis, definitely wanted to leave them in. They're both middleweights with a lot of power. Very good shot. One of those two came away with a finish if they did win. I thought Morono was a good bet. He's not projecting extremely well, but he had a really high probability of beating Mickey Gall. Cape is the one who is fighting Zumagulov. Obviously wanted to leave him in. And then, I'm going to botch this name, but Murskinov was fighting Vanderaa. That was the fight that was canceled. Jim Crute, you can see he's got really good projections. I believe he has the second highest median and ceiling. Yep. In our models. I was very big on Hill. We're going to get more into that later, but I was willing to go so far as to say I don't want any Crute. Even if he did win, Hill is a really good defensive fighter. He's taller, rangy. I didn't think Crute would be able to win and put up enough points to justify $9,200 in salary. If Crute was similar odds but down here in this 8,500 range, he probably would have been in some of my lineups, but not at his current price. And then Matthews against Wells, that was another fight that was canceled. And then the last one I got rid of was Leonardo Santos versus Clay Guida. Most of us who follow MMA know a lot about Clay Guida, but he's extremely durable, tough veteran, been around forever. Santos was another one who, if he was about 500 cheaper, I would have considered him, but he's just way too expensive for his odds of actually making it into the optimal lineup. You can see some of the ownership over here. That's just from lineups I was playing with earlier and getting prepared to make this video. Didn't actually make any of my lineups at this event. So the next thing we're going to do is head over to our optimizer. We can click here. I'm going to clear out these old lineups I was toying with. We're going to click over to settings. So what I like to do is start with the player groups, and I'm going to talk you through how I did each of these. So first, I wanted one of Jamal Hill or Jeremiah Wells. These two fighters both, I thought, had way better odds of finishing their fights than their salary or the market would suggest, and I figured they would both come in at fairly low ownership thanks to their long odds. I had a better read on this one than a lot of people have an opportunity to. For those that don't know, which is I'm assuming everyone, I was a professional MMA fighter. I live in Michigan, where Hill is from, so I'm friendly with some of his teammates and coaches and stuff. I'm very big on him. I think he probably has the best pure boxing in MMA, which is huge because we get so many extra points for knockouts, especially quick knockouts. He'd been on a tear other than when he ran into Paul Craig. I didn't really see Crute as a submission grappler who was going to execute that plan on him, so I wanted a lot of Hill, especially at low ownership. Jeremiah Wells, I was actually booked to fight at one point in my life. We had a signed contract and everything, but the event got canceled. So I've watched a ton of tape on him. He's either a brown or a black belt out of Renzo Gracie, Philly. Great submissions, super strong, crazy power. I wasn't confident he was going to win, but I was confident if he did win, it would be an explosive score that put us at the top of the leaderboard at super low ownership. It's hard to get unique in these. It's kind of like a NFL showdown slate where finding that unique lineup is almost more important than making a good lineup. I thought both of these guys gave me a really good shot at getting to a unique lineup. Wells' fight ended up being canceled, but they were within 100 of each other in salary. That allowed me to just swap in Hill for all of my Wells lineups. All right, next one. I wanted at least or exactly one fighter from the main event. With MMA contests, the two fighters against each other, their salaries always add up to $16,200. But title fights and main events are 5-round fights instead of 3-round fights. So that means they're getting an extra 2 rounds, or the winner of that is going to win by stoppage. It's incredibly hard, if not impossible, to win a tournament or anything major without the winning fighter from the main event. So I obviously wanted at least one of them. I shouldn't say at least, exactly one of them, because they can't both win the fight. So we're going to talk more about main event strategy shortly, but for the most part, when there's only one 5-round fight on an event, you always want to have a rule of exactly one of those fighters. And then the last one, I wanted one of Alonzo Menafield and William Knight. These are two light heavyweights. They both have great finish rates, but there's a little bit more nuance than that. Menafield has won all but one of his pro fights within a minute or so of the second round of the fight, and usually if it gets past that, his opponent ends up winning. Menafield was super expensive here. We're going to delete these guys just so we can see the salaries. Yeah, Menafield, not super expensive, but 8.7K, which meant Knight was on the cheaper end. So basically, the way I saw this one going, either Menafield won within the first 6 minutes or so, and because of the early scoring bonus, that would be a good day for him at his salary, or Knight at the much cheaper salary won, probably by decision. But a Knight decision is fine at only $7,500. It's really hard for him to not put up a good enough score to make it to the winning lineup with any kind of win. So I wanted exactly one of those guys in there as well. So that's all for the player groups. I originally had the Vandera fight in there as exactly one of. It was the only heavyweight bout on the card. Heavyweights get a lot more finishes than other weight classes. I don't want to say this is a rule, but we very frequently need whichever heavyweight ends up winning to have a good shot at a lineup. Just there's so many more knockouts. Alright, so we're going to click over here to General. The first thing I did was set the bounce to 20. So bounce decreases a player's projections after they're in your lineup, and then it slowly recovers for each lineup built without them. This was just to give me a wider range of fighters that made it to my final lineup. If I didn't set something like that, this would end up looking a lot like my hand builds, where it's just the higher projected guys plus the guys I like. There'd be no point in using an optimizer for that. So this was going to put me on some plays and some builds that I wouldn't have came up with on my own, which is the whole beauty of the optimizer, especially for something like MMA where we don't have a ton of inputs. All we have is floor, median, and ceiling projections. But we can use that just to give us a little bit of randomness in there and mix in some other guys. Same thing with the range of outcomes. That just gives a 5% plus or minus to the range of outcomes of a fighter's projection. Similar concept, just to diversify my player pool a little bit. And the last thing I did is I set the max exposure to 75%. The big reason here is I wanted to force more Aldo lineups and not just Font from there. Usually the underdog in main events is heavily undervalued. Aldo was 120 plus 125 going into this one, which is about a 44% chance of winning. You can use the Action Network odds calculator to figure that out. But his ownership was way less than that. I'm going to check over here. Aldo was in only 17% of lineups. So if he's got a 44% chance of winning, an almost guaranteed shot of being in the optimal lineup if he does win, at 17% ownership, that's huge leverage. You're going to see this a lot with main event fighters. The field tends to drastically overweight the favorite in that. We saw Amanda Nunes get shocked. Calvin Kattar just won last week at lower ownership than he should have. It's going to be plus EV more often than not to have some exposure, to be overweight on the underdog in that. I still wanted some font. I thought he was a deserving favorite, roughly. Obviously pretty close odds. But with the field overreacting, we're going to want more of the underdog than the field. Then the last thing over here, this is absolutely 100% crucial for tournaments. You have to avoid fighters from the same fight. So much of MMA scoring is based on the win bonus, they can't both win. With draws in MMA, which is pretty infrequent, neither fighter gets the win bonus, but that's not really the point. We need 6 winning fighters in our lineup to have a shot at winning most tournaments. Unless you're playing super small field, like single entry, 100 entrants kind of thing, somebody is going to find a lineup with 6 winning fighters. So we got to click that. And then before we finish that, I've got 90% minimum salary cap set. I've looked through past winning lineups in a lot of MMA contests. They don't usually come close to using the full 50,000. I mean, some do, but at a far less rate than, big team sports stuff. So it's kind of like an NFL showdown, where one way we can get unique is by spending less of the salary cap. We'll click over here and see what my winning lineup used. Winning lineup used 49.8, and then my lineup in third used all of it. 49.9. So it's certainly possible to win with most of the salary cap spent, but that's not always going to be the case. Neither of those were actually the optimal lineup. My qualifier winner was, I think, 7th in a bigger tournament I played in. We'd have to go back and check to see what the optimal salary was, but I'm not making it a rule that I don't spend all of it, but we certainly don't need to prioritize that. So now I'm going to click Apply Settings over here. When I ran this originally, I made 20 lineups. You always want to optimize by ceiling, not median projection. One, that's going to give us fighters like Hill and Wells, even if you don't set that rule. But two, we need the best score possible. We're not just trying to win a cash game. We're trying to get the first place score. That's not going to be possible without a fighter's ceiling. So we can generate these lineups. After that, I look over here at the exposures. So this went a little bit over Rob Font on what I would have liked based on what my settings were, but we can still see how many Aldo lineups we stuck with after I saved these. So I'm just going to save all these lineups, head over to my lineups. Hold on, let's clear out these old ones. We're going to click all, delete all the old lineups I had saved in there. Sorry about that. Alright, we're going to save these 20 lineups. 15 lineups, it only made us 15. And we're going to search for how many Aldo lineups we want. That only gave us 2. So I'm going to go back on that actually. Because like I said, I want to be underweight on the favorite or overweight on the underdog. I'm going to drop this down to 60%. It's obviously going to violate that with Hill. It didn't originally because it had a lot of Wells lineups in there as well. Let's try these settings, clear it, and generate. Yeah, now it's fixed a little bit. We've only got 12 lineups, but 3 of them are going to have Jose Aldo. Alright, so now we've got the 24 total. I can see how many Aldo lineups I want. I entered 7 lineups in this contest. I believe I had 3 Aldo and 4 Font, which was enough to get over the field. But I can go through and pick the lineups I want, just put a little tag there, and then when I go to download them into DraftKings, I can download by the tag. So this one is fairly close to the winning lineup. It had Menafield instead, which messed us up. Anyway, not the point. You can go through and sort through all of your lineups, see all the ones it generated, pick which ones you wanted. But we're going to go back just in case you wanted to make 150 and see what we can do. So we're going to delete all of them again. Change this setting to 150. It's not going to give us 150. Our rules are going to be a little bit too restrictive for that, I think. But let's see what happens when we do. Yeah, that gives us 90 lineups, and it smoothed out the ownership a little bit on Font, dropped him down just a little bit more. We can still obviously manually toy with that. If I was really doing 100 lineups, I'd probably loosen up some of the restrictions on there just to give it an opportunity to make more lineups for us. Then the last thing I wanted to talk about, we kind of discussed it with the main event fighters. There's a lot of events, especially pay-per-views, that either have multiple title fights or just random 5-round fights thrown in there. That's where things get a little bit tricky. Especially if you're trying to cram in all of the favorites into your lineups. Like this upcoming weekend, we have 2 title fights. It's going to be pretty restricted from a salary standpoint to get both of the favorites. So what I try to do there is set a rule, depending on how many there are, where I have at least one underdog from a 5-round fight in all of my lineups. That seems to be like the most plus EV, just general rule without knowing anything about MMA. And you don't even have to look up betting odds. You can just say underdog based on their salaries here, which usually tracks pretty well. So that's one more trick just for the pay-per-view cards, which usually have more than one 5-round fight. But for the free cards or the ESPN Plus cards, it's fairly easy. We just go to our settings, and we want to have at least one fighter from the main event. In this case, Aldo or Font, and then I manually tinker with it to make sure I'm overweight on the underdog. But yeah, that's it. We're going to do more videos down the line with some strategy on cash games and some other stuff, but hopefully this guys gives you guys a nice starting point on how to build MMA lineups, and I'll see you in the DraftKings street. Thanks.